So hey guys, welcome to a new movie review. Today I'm talking about Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. With this film, you guys, what happened is Richard Donner he originally got kicked off the set of Superman 2, and from what I could gather, basically the studio didn't like that he wanted to take the sequel in a much darker direction than the first film since he was the director of the first film. And they also thought Marlon Brando was too expensive for the time, and because Richard Donner refused to cut Brando's scenes, they thought it would just be easier just to kick Richard Donner himself off the directing position for the movie. So they hired Richard Lester, and we got the Superman 2 that most people are familiar with. But they're not probably familiar with this version unless they picked it up a while back or they picked it up recently like I did. Um, so this is Richard Donner's vision of Superman 2. So basically, any footage he could find, since I guess they stored it away for several years, that they could find and use for editing and everything else. Almost everything he shot was found, and what they had to do is because he got kicked off the set, he had to use some of Richard Lester's footage to fill in the gaps to make the storyline feel complete. And because, in a way, Richard Lester filmed some of the scenes he was going to film anyway, it was just easier for Richard Donner to gather what basically would have been his version of Superman 2. So I will may have a confession before we start this review, you guys. I haven't seen the original Superman 2 cut all the way through before. I've seen most of it. I recognized a lot of the scenes from that movie in this one. Um, I'm familiar with the story of Superman 2. Um, I know that the famous Superman kiss, where he kisses Lois Lane and she forgets everything, it's played out a little differently in this version. So for those who are familiar with that from the original cut, that scene is gone from here. Um, so they play it out completely differently, and I don't want to spoil it, but that how they play that out is completely different in this version. So for the storyline, you guys, since a lot of people are familiar with it, and for the most part, Richard Donner does keep the original Superman 2 storyline here. He had his vision on how the story played out, and certain things like Lois Lane um, trying to get Clark Kent to finally reveal his identity as Superman is played out a little bit more in this version, from what I could gather. Um, so small things like that are played out more here, and of course the obvious change here. It even says right here on the cover, never before seen footage including Marlon Brando as Jor-El. So that's the obvious change here, is that we get to actually see Marlon Brando as Jor-El, and from what I could gather, I think we hear him off screen. I think in the original version, at least that's what I think. Um, that or they cut away or something. They do something. But yeah, we actually get to see Marlon Brando in the movie this time for this version. Um, and so basically, in this film, you guys, the missile from the end of Superman 1 that Lex Luthor was gonna kill a lot of people with. It hits the cube that General Zod and the other two Kryptonian people were stuck in from the first film, and they kind of recap the first film a little bit, and it hits it, it destroys it, and General Zod and his team, they head over to Earth, and basically they find out that they're more dominant over human beings, that they can do more things, that they're much more powerful, that human beings don't stand a chance against them. So not only do they take over some towns, they decide to take over the United States itself. So they go over and they basically hold the White House hostage and everything else, and um, try to take over the world in a sense. They start with the U.S. and they were hoping to continue with the rest of the world. But people tell them that Superman is kind of their protector. So in a way, General Zod wants to immediately seek out Superman and kill him. He finds out that that's Jor-El's son. Further reason that he wants to kill him now. since Jarrell put him in that cube several years ago, and so basically throughout the rest of the movie, it's about Zod trying to get rid of Superman so he can take over Earth, and as usual, it's about Superman protecting Earth from Zod and getting rid of Zod and the two other people that followed him to Earth. So for the positives and negatives, you guys, I do think this is a better film than, at least in the Richard Donner version anyway. Um, I think the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 is a better film overall than the original Superman. So Superman 1, or Superman the movie, as I think they just call it. Yeah, I think it's just a better film. I mean, it's just more interesting. I think, the General Zod villain was more interesting as a villain than Lex Luthor was. Don't get me wrong, Gene Hackman was a great Lex Luthor. I personally just prefer General Zod as a villain more so than Lex Luthor. Um, Kal-El's or Clark Kent's, whoever, whatever you want to call that character, his realization of why he's a hero and not a human, why Superman has to be this protector of Earth and why he can't really live a normal life like a normal person can. I like how in this film they kind of play off of that, how he thought he could just live a normal life with Lois Lane, but then all the stuff with Zod happens right when he thought that Earth was protected for good, it was safe for good, and then that's when he realizes there really is Earth is always going to have some type of threat happening. He always has to be Superman 24/7 because Earth needs a protector, and Kal-El is meant to be that protector of Earth. And I like how the film kind of plays off of that, how Superman really, he isn't your average human being. He has to be this protector of Earth. He can't just live a normal life like your average Joe can. For the time it was made, I think it was 82. I don't know if that's the right year or not. So if this was released in 1982, there were some pretty reasonable special effects in here, I thought. Nothing spectacular. Star Wars, the original Star Wars trilogy, I think Return of the Jedi wasn't out yet, but for sure episode 4 and 5 were already out by then. Nowhere near as close to the special effects of that department, but for the time it was made, I thought this was pretty reasonable special effects. So thumbs up for me in that department. The performances of Christopher Reeves and Margot Kidder were great in this. I really liked Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. Don't get me wrong, I thought Amy Adams was a great Lois Lane in Man of Steel, but Margot Kidder, definitely with this version of the film, I thought she really nailed the whole Lois Lane role. Like I liked her spunky attitude. I liked how she's always trying to convince Clark Kent that that is Superman. That he can't fool her and all that kind of stuff. Um, and Christopher Reeves, I mean that man was Superman. I mean he really. I didn't care for Brandon Routh's as Superman when Superman Returns. I loved Henry Cavill in Man of Steel, but I mean really Christopher Reeve really understood that Superman character. So huge thumbs up for the two of them. Um, I kind of talked about this briefly not too long ago. Lois Lane's fun revealing of Superman as Clark Kent. Trying to convince Clark Kent that she knows that he is Superman. I thought the way they played off of that was pretty fun, like I was saying before. I thought General Zod, like I was once again saying before, was an overall better villain than Lex Luthor. I think just Zod is, he's more of a how do you say it? He's a harder competition for Superman to fight, I guess. I don't know. For me, Lex Luthor, he was just kind of this businessman that knew how to manipulate people, and I think Zod was a lot more than that. Zod actually, you actually have to fight Zod. He's a tough guy to take down and everything. So I liked how I thought the overall General Zod villain was a much better villain. Um, I also like how this film makes the first Superman film feel more complete, as Richard Donner, I'm sure, intended it to be. It just gives more closure, more completion. You leave this film, knowing that there's a more of a complete story here than what Richard Donner was only able to do with the first Superman film. So once again, the beauty of the Richard Donner version is we have to get to see what he originally intended Superman 2 to be, and in a sense, we get more of a completion of that story. For the negatives, you guys, I thought there's a lot of really outdated humor in this, specifically from Mrs. Teschmacher, if I said that right. I know her role was a lot bigger in the first film, but really a lot of outdated humor in this. Like on all the scenes that were trying to be funny, it was just really flat. I'd be shocked if people even back then thought that some of the jokes in this was funny at all. Um, Ned Beatty's small role as Otis, he came back for this one too, at least in the Donner version anyway. I thought his role felt a little too small. It almost felt like that there was more footage stored away somewhere. Either they didn't use it, or maybe Richard Donner just felt like it just kind of ruined his interpretation of Superman 2 or something. But I felt his role felt really, really minor compared to the first Superman film. So I wish they either could have done more with him or just completely skipped the character altogether. Maybe have him do a cameo or something because what they did with him here really felt incomplete as far as his character went. Um, there's some really laughable, cheesy moments in this film too, so you can definitely tell it's an older movie. After a while, it just kind of like, okay, let's make a more serious film here, you guys. Um, like I was saying before, the use of Mish Teschmacher are really unnecessary. I found her annoying the whole film. Um, so one other character where either they should have just done a cameo or something, or make this role smaller, because the way they used her in this, I thought was really annoying. There's some pretty noticeable Richard Donner changes in here. I've also seen some of the special features on this DVD. Things like Marlon Brando's head photoshopped on, a shot from maybe Superman 1 or from a screen test. You can definitely tell that there were some pretty noticeable changes they made compared to the original Superman 2. So, um, a little bit of a thumbs down just because, we've been waiting so many years for this version of Superman 2. And it would have been nicer if they would have cleaned it up a little bit more. Maybe really convinced us that that was the way they shot it, because you can just tell that it was just a brother Brando head like glued onto like a body that was clearly not the position they had him filmed in when they were redoing the Richard Donner version. Um, I personally thought Michael Shannon's General Zod was a much better interpretation of the character, to tell you the truth. I liked his more military approach to the character. You really understood Michael Shannon's Zod more than you did with Terence Stamp, who played Zod in this film. I thought that the reasoning behind Zod was better in Man of Steel than it was here. Just my personal opinion. I know a lot of people are going to disagree, but um, for me, I liked Michael Shannon's interpretation of the character just a little bit more. Overall, I thought Man of Steel was an overall better film than this one. People are going to say, "Oh, well, it's an older film. You shouldn't be so hard on it." And oh, Christopher Reeves was the best, Superman and everything else. But I don't know. I thought Man of Steel really it hit all the right notes, to tell you the truth. And so I don't know. But overall, guys, I give Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's a much better film than the original Superman. Not quite Man of Steel quality quite yet, but Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder really have some great performances here. A really fun film to watch, too. I never really felt bored during this movie. So if you can track down Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, like I was saying before, 8.5 out of 10 for me. Pretty fun film, but it's not quite Man of Steel quality. And like I was saying before, there's some pretty noticeable changes that you can see throughout watching the movie. If I can track down the Richard Lester version of Superman 2, I might review that later on also. But for now, the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 is pretty awesome.